I used to think that jobs were just jobs. You clocked in, did your shift, and clocked out. Nothing personal. But it turns out, when you spend 40 hours a week somewhere, around the same faces, breathing the same stale air, the place starts to bleed into your life. It's not just a job anymore. It's a stage where every glance, every offhand comment, every coffee break conversation becomes part of a bigger story you're living. And in my case, that story turned out to be more about betrayal than anything else. When I first started at that donut shop, let's just call it Sweet Circle for now, it wasn't glamorous. I mean, it was donuts. Glazed, filled, powdered, sprinkled, the whole sugary lineup. The kind of place where customers came in with bed hair and pajamas on Sunday mornings, still smelling like last night's cheap vodka and bad decisions, and left with a box of 12. I wasn't there to chase some culinary dream. I just needed the paycheck. Rent wasn't going to pay itself, and my savings account was a sad joke. So when I got hired, I told myself, this is temporary. Keep your head down, do the work, and move on. The first few months were fine, maybe even better than fine. I'm not a naturally outgoing person. I've always been more of a listen and nod type, but I learned my duties quickly. I asked questions when I needed to, didn't mind cleaning up messes, and I never complained about staying late if someone didn't show up. At that point, my life outside work was quiet. I lived alone in a small studio apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place where the walls were thin enough to hear your neighbor's late-night Netflix binges, but still felt weirdly comforting. Then came the transfer. They moved me from one Sweet Circle location to another, and that's when things started to change. The new store had a different vibe. On paper, it was the same company, same uniforms, same recipes, but the people were another story. From the second week in, I could tell I wasn't going to fit in. It's not like anyone outright said, "We don't like you." No, it was more subtle than that. The shift leaders had their inside jokes, their half-whispered comments, the way they'd stop talking when I walked into the back room. I'd stand at the sink scrubbing trays, pretending not to notice, but deep down I did. I tried though. I really did. I asked questions, tried to be helpful, even laughed at their lame vape-related jokes, but nothing landed. They had their little clique, and I wasn't invited. It was high school all over again, except now, instead of cafeteria tables, it was prep counters dusted with powdered sugar, and yet it wasn't the cold shoulders that really got to me. It was the filth. Look, I get it. Food service isn't the cleanest industry in the world. A little mess here and there, fine. But this place was something else. We had bugs. I'm not talking about one stray fly that sneaks in when someone leaves the door open. I mean bugs. The kind that set up permanent residence in the display case, crawling across the icing like they owned the place. I remember the first time I noticed them. I was wiping down the donut shelf after closing. There was this glossy chocolate-covered ring sitting there, and right on top of it was a tiny brown beetle, just hanging out. I flicked it off, disgusted, and thought maybe it was a one-time thing. But then the next morning, there were more. It didn't take long before I realized it was normal here. Bugs on the donuts, bugs in the sugar bins, bugs. The managers didn't care. They'd just brush them off, laugh, and put the donuts back on display like nothing happened. Customers never seemed to notice, and if they did, they didn't say a word. And the smell, God, the smell. Sweet Circle had its signature scent at my old location, a mix of yeast, sugar, and frying oil. This place smelled like that, plus stale vape clouds and cigarette smoke. The managers and shift leaders would stand right outside the door, puffing away like it was a competition, then stroll back in reeking of blueberry vape juice and cheap menthols. Sometimes they didn't even bother going outside. They'd huddle in the back, the cloud so thick you could barely see the racks of cooling donuts. And yeah, maybe I don't have a moral crusade against smoking or vaping, but when you're in food service, in the kitchen, around trays of donuts you're selling to families and kids, it's insane. Still, I kept my mouth shut. I figured, not my circus, not my monkeys. My job was to do my tasks, collect my paycheck, and leave. But things got worse. I started getting fewer shifts, the schedule would come out, and I'd see my name slowly slipping down the list. I didn't complain. I thought maybe it was just a slow season, or they were trying to spread the hours around. Then I noticed certain co-workers getting extra shifts, even when they'd call out half the time. It wasn't about performance, it was about popularity, and I wasn't popular. Still, I didn't expect what happened next. One day, I got pulled aside by one of the managers, let's call her Denise. She gave me that fake sweet smile that people wear when they're about to ruin your day. She told me I'd been underperforming, that I wasn't engaged enough, and that customers had complained about me. It was news to me. She made it sound like a friendly warning, but there was this edge to her voice that made my stomach twist. So I doubled down. The very next day, I came in like a soldier on a mission. I asked more questions than ever. I wiped down every surface twice. I made sure the donut cases were spotless, even if it meant staying late. I listened to every bit of feedback, and nodded like my life depended on it. But it didn't matter. The next day, I got called into the office again. This time it wasn't a warning, it was a termination. They told me I wasn't improving, that I wasn't the right fit, and that was that. Just like that, I was out. I left the store that day in a daze. My uniform still smelled faintly of fryer oil and blueberry vape. My hands still sticky from glazing donuts that morning. I didn't cry, not yet. I just walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the steering wheel for a good 10 minutes. And that's when the anger started to set in. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't about performance. It wasn't about me not fitting in. It was about them not liking me from the start. And maybe it wasn't even personal. Maybe I was just the easy target. The quiet one. The one who wouldn't fight back. At least, that's what they thought. That day after I got fired, I drove home in this fog of disbelief and frustration. I kept replaying every moment, every conversation, every glance I'd gotten in the last few weeks. I thought maybe I was overreacting, that maybe I had messed up somewhere. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't add up. Like they gave me a warning the day before, sure, but I actually tried. I wasn't the type to just brush it off, or pretend to care. I was there early, staying late, asking more questions than I'd ever asked before, double-checking everything. I was trying to prove that I wasn't that not engaged person they claimed I was. But the kicker, when I was at the old store, things were fine. I wasn't best friends with anyone, but nobody hated me either. I showed up, did my job and left. No drama, no whispers behind my back. And then suddenly, at the new store, it was like I was radioactive or something. I still don't get why half the staff seemed to despise me for no clear reason. It's this whole weird vibe. People would shut down conversations when I came in, or start whispering, and then stop abruptly. I wasn't cliquey. I didn't gossip or stir up trouble. I barely talked small talk, because I wasn't a people person. But that apparently wasn't enough to keep me out of their crosshairs. I remember one morning, standing behind the counter, wiping down the glass case, when Denise, the manager who gave me the warning, was chatting with two other shift leaders right nearby. They stopped talking. The second I walked in, I caught the look Denise gave me. That smirk, like she was already judging me, waiting to catch me screwing up. And you know what? I wasn't perfect, I'll admit it. Sometimes I was slow on the register, or forgot to restock a few napkins, but I was learning. I wanted to learn, but the hostility was crushing. It felt like they were waiting for a reason to toss me out. That made me mad, really mad. Not just the firing, but the whole sneaky way they did it. The whispers, the bugs on the donuts, the managers vaping and smoking right in front of customers, as if it was normal. Like I'm not some prude who thinks smoking is evil or anything. But when you're working in food service, isn't that a bit unprofessional? Yet they were there puffing away, clouds of vape swirling like fog machines, while I was cleaning up the mess they left behind. I remember vividly how the store smelled on my last day, a heavy mix of fried dough, stale smoke and blueberry vape juice. It was like stepping into some weird dystopian donut shop nightmare. And here I was, sweating and scrubbing, trying to keep things clean, only to get kicked out like I was the problem. I wanted to say something. I wanted to scream. Look around. The place is disgusting. Bugs everywhere. You smoke right where customers stand. How is this okay? But who would listen? They probably didn't want to hear it from me. I was just the problem employees to them. After that day, I spiraled a bit. I didn't know what to do. I'd been out of work before, but this felt different. It wasn't just losing a job. It was being rejected, humiliated in front of people I barely knew, without even a chance to defend myself properly. I started thinking about revenge, but not in the way you see in movies. I didn't want to burn the place down or smear their names on social media. I wanted to get back at the managers, the ones who hated me for no reason, and let the store run like a dump. The people who had no clue what professionalism meant, but who held all the power. I wanted them to feel what it was like to be hated, ignored and disrespected. Not the crew members. They were decent folks who helped me sometimes. No, I wanted to hit those who pulled the strings, who passed judgment without ever really looking at me or giving me a fair shot. So I started watching, not in a creepy way, but more like a detective, looking for the cracks, the dirt, the hypocrisy. And boy, there was plenty. There were moments I caught Denise sneaking cigarettes behind the dumpster during breaks, even though it was supposed to be a smoke-free zone, or the head shift leader, Mark, vaping right at the cash register while customers ordered. One time, I saw them arguing over a cleaning schedule that never got done properly because it's easier to ignore it. One of them said, laughing, "One day, as I was cleaning after closing, I noticed something that made my stomach churn. The donut display had dozens of tiny insects crawling over the glazed pastries. It was disgusting. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, the bugs clearly visible on the chocolate and vanilla donuts. I thought about sending it to corporate or the health department, but worried it'd blow back on the crew. And honestly, the thought of some kind of quiet revenge started to grow in me. A way to expose the management without hurting the workers. I figured if I could get some proof, some dirt on them, maybe I could use it to make them pay for what they did to me. Not just for me, but for every person they'd ever treated like dirt. But revenge felt scary too. I wasn't a vindictive person by nature. I hated conflict. Yet here I was, thinking about schemes and paybacks like it was some twisted game. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the moments over and over. The smirks, the silence, the bug-covered donuts, the vaping managers. I felt small but burning inside, like a fire barely flickering, waiting for a gust to blow it into a blaze. I promised myself, if they think they can get away with this, they're wrong. I'm not going to be the forgotten one. After that day when they fired me, everything changed. Or maybe it was more accurate to say that nothing changed, but I changed. I woke up the next morning feeling like a ghost, like my usual rhythm was shattered, and I was just drifting through the cracks. I went through the motions of daily life, making coffee, scrolling through social media, answering texts, but my mind was somewhere else. All I could see were flashes of the store, the bug-infested donuts, the managers blowing vape clouds like they owned the place, the cold, judgmental looks from Denise and Mark. I thought about calling my old co-workers, the ones who had been nice to me, but the thought of dragging them into my mess made me hesitate. I didn't want to be that person who complains or drags people into drama, so I stayed quiet. At first I tried looking for new jobs immediately, applying for anything remotely similar, but every rejection email felt like another slap in the face. I began doubting myself. Was I really the problem? Had I actually been not engaged? Was I really that bad? My confidence took a nosedive. I replayed every interaction, every mistake, every awkward silence, trying to find the why. I remembered the weird vibes, the cold shoulders, and how no one ever explained why they disliked me. It felt unfair, like being punished for a crime I never knew I committed. And then there was the creeping anxiety. I started waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing, thinking about the store, about Denise's smirk, about the bugs crawling over pastries. I imagined walking into the place again,
and everyone ignoring me, or worse, mocking me behind my back. The longer I stayed unemployed, the heavier the weight on my chest grew. I tried to distract myself by binge-watching shows and scrolling endlessly on my phone, but nothing filled the emptiness. I even thought about talking to a therapist, but put it off, because I felt like I should just deal with it. One day, I found myself scrolling through online reviews of Sweet Circle. To my surprise, I wasn't the only one who had complaints. There were comments about the store's cleanliness, the weird smell, and even about managers smoking near customers. One reviewer mentioned seeing bugs on the counters. That's when a cold realization hit me. This wasn't just my problem or my failure. It was a toxic environment that management allowed, maybe even encouraged. It made me angrier, but also sadder. Sad that I had been dragged down by people who didn't care about their job, their team, or their customers. And angrier because they'd done it to me personally, without reason. At the same time, I felt isolated. I hadn't told my family or close friends what really happened. I was embarrassed. I didn't want to seem like a failure or a complainer, so I kept the whole thing bottled up. But secrets have a way of eating at you. I started having nightmares, not of spiders or monsters, but of the store itself. The buzzing fluorescent lights, the sticky floors, the haze of vape smoke hanging low. I'd see myself standing behind the counter, surrounded by smiling co-workers, who suddenly turned cold and walked away, leaving me alone with the bugs and the smoke. That's when I realized I couldn't just sit and feel sorry for myself anymore. I needed to do something. I thought about confronting the managers directly, but I knew it wouldn't end well. They had power, and I was just a former employee. Plus, confrontation wasn't really my style. Instead, I started gathering small pieces of evidence, photos I'd secretly taken of the bugs on the donuts, notes on the vaping habits I witnessed, timestamps of when managers took unauthorized breaks. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with it yet, but having it felt like reclaiming some control. I also reached out quietly to a couple of crew members who had been kind to me. I didn't want to drag them into anything messy, but I wanted to know if they had noticed the same problems. Their responses were mixed. Some had seen the issues, but were too afraid to speak up, worried about losing their jobs. Others admitted they were frustrated, but felt powerless against management. That was the moment I understood how deep the rot went. It wasn't just about me. It was about a culture of neglect and disrespect that had been allowed to thrive. And it made me wonder, if I was this angry and hurt, how many others had been crushed quietly before me. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, for myself, for the crew, for the customers, who deserved better. But at the same time, I was scared. What if I blew the whistle and nothing changed? What if I became the next target? What if it hurt me more than it helped? Those questions haunted me as I stared at the pictures of the bugs crawling on the donuts. I realized revenge wasn't just about hurting the people who hurt me. It was about exposing the truth, even if it scared me. So I started making plans, small careful steps to make sure my voice would be heard. But before that, I had to come to terms with the pain, the rejection, the humiliation, the anger that still burned deep inside, and that wasn't easy.
The days that followed my firing felt like walking through fog, but slowly, beneath the confusion and hurt, a new feeling was growing. Determination. I realized that if I wanted to reclaim my dignity, I couldn't just stew in anger or wallow in self-pity. I needed to act, but carefully. I started small. I revisited those photos I had taken, the bugs crawling over the donuts, the grime on the countertops, the vape smoke hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. I looked at each picture, again and again, imagining what would happen if I shared them. But with whom? Would anyone listen? And could I protect the workers I cared about while taking on the managers? At first, I considered going straight to corporate. Maybe the franchise owner, the regional manager, someone higher up could care enough to intervene. But I worried, what if I became a nuisance? What if they just swept it all under the rug? Or worse, what if it came back on the crew members, the friendly faces I didn't want to hurt? Then one evening, As I scrolled through the company's online reviews again, I saw a few other people describing similar issues: uncleanliness, bad management, favoritism, and unsafe practices. It was oddly comforting and frustrating at the same time. I wasn't alone. This had been going on for years, and nobody had done anything. I reached out to a former crew member who had once helped me cover a shift. Her name was Sarah, and she was wary at first but honest. She admitted that she had noticed the bugs and the vaping, but was too afraid to say anything. Management's favoritism was real, she told me, and retaliation was brutal. I understood then that my revenge couldn't be reckless. It had to be strategic, exposing the truth without hurting those who didn't deserve it. I started writing an anonymous blog post, detailing the dirty secrets behind the shiny glass donut cases. I described the bug infestations, the managers' vaping habits, the toxic workplace culture. I peppered it with photos and insider details that only someone who worked there would know. Publishing that post felt like lifting a weight off my chest. Comments poured in from current and former employees who shared their own stories. The anonymous account began to gain traction, and people started tagging the company on social media. It wasn't long before the store's local health department got wind of the complaints. They came to inspect unannounced and found violations that shocked even me: unsanitary conditions, evidence of insect infestation, and improper employee conduct. The managers I hated so much faced official warnings, and the store was temporarily shut down for deep cleaning and staff retraining. The news spread like wildfire through social media and local news outlets. Watching it all unfold was bittersweet. On one hand, I felt vindicated, like justice had finally been served. On the other, a part of me mourned the loss of my job and the fragile relationships I had built with the crew members who were now caught in the crossfire. Through it all, I wrestled with conflicting emotions. Was I a hero, standing up for what was right, or had I become a troublemaker who burned bridges in pursuit of revenge? I reminded myself that I didn't want to hurt anyone unjustly, only to hold accountable those who let the store rot while they smoked and vaped behind the counters. Was I a hero, standing up for what was right of the eating behind the counters? The experience changed me. I learned that silence often protects the wrong people, and that speaking up, even anonymously, can spark change. I found a new strength inside myself, a voice that refused to be ignored. The whole ordeal also taught me something about forgiveness, or at least acceptance. I realized I couldn't control how others acted, but I could choose how I responded. I chose to channel my pain into action rather than bitterness. In the end, my revenge wasn't about destroying the managers. It was about reclaiming my self-respect and demanding better for everyone who worked there and for the customers who deserved to trust what they bought. After the health department's inspection and the temporary shutdown of the store, things changed, at least on the surface. The managers who had once laughed behind my back and smoked right beside the registers suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. Corporate sent in new supervisors, and there were promises of a fresh start and improved workplace culture. It felt like a small victory, but I knew better than to expect miracles overnight. In the weeks that followed, I kept tabs on the store from a distance. The social media storm quieted down, and the new management tried hard to show they were different. I even heard some of the crew members got raises or better schedules. It was hard to say if things truly improved, or if it was just a carefully scripted PR move. Either way, I allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction, but the biggest change was inside me. I stopped feeling like a victim, and started feeling like someone who had agency. It wasn't easy. I still struggled with anger and moments of self-doubt. Sometimes I wondered if I should have just walked away quietly, avoided the drama, saved my energy for something better. But then I remembered how those managers looked when they fired me, the way they smiled like they owned everything, and I knew I had made the right choice for me. One afternoon, months later, I bumped into Sarah, the former crew member I'd confided in. She was no longer working at Sweet Circle, but she thanked me quietly, saying that my blog post had inspired her to speak up at her next job and demand better treatment. That meant more to me than any public praise ever could. I also learned to forgive,
not necessarily the managers but myself. I forgave myself for feeling weak at times, for letting their judgment get under my skin, for doubting my worth. I forgave myself for wanting revenge, because it was really about reclaiming respect and justice. Now, I'm working a new job, one where I'm treated fairly, and where I feel respected. I don't think about that donut shop every day anymore, but sometimes when I see a glazed donut or smell the faint scent of fried dough, I remember that chapter of my life, painful, ugly, but also a turning point. Looking back, I'm grateful. Grateful that I didn't let silence swallow me whole. Grateful that I found my voice, even when it trembled. And grateful that sometimes the sweetest victories come not from what you gain, but from what you refuse to lose. Your dignity, your hope, your sense of self. So if you ever find yourself in a place where you feel invisible, ignored, or unfairly treated, remember this: you're not alone. And sometimes, standing up, even quietly, or anonymously, can be the first step toward reclaiming your life. Because at the end of the day, we all deserve a little sweetness and respect in our lives.